Welcome back, everyone. Today what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through the process of speeding up your model testing. So you might be training a lot of models via your local setup, some other platform, or the Civit web trainer. And what I wanted to do was give you a whole load of tips that's going to speed that process up. So first thing, obviously, is you're going to have to load them up. Okay, the previews that you get from often when you're doing the training, maybe you might want to be a little bit more robust. So the first thing that I do is I use a tool which I call Caption Collector. That's on my GitHub. You put the two scripts into your data set, run it, and it will give you a prompt list. That prompt list can then go inside your, whatever prompt list you use, really. But if you don't want to miss my next video, hit that subscribe button, because YouTube ain't going to tell you. Personally, I've got my own. So what I do is I chuck the prompt lists into, if I go into Comfy UI, I go into custom nodes, I go to the DJZ nodes, not that one, but this one. There's a prompts folder. You can chuck text files in here, and as you can see, if I put the preview on, that's all of the prompts that were trained. So we've collected all of the captions from the dataset into a list of them. And then when you're actually in the workflow, you can use my Zenkai prompt. V2 is the one I use, but V1 works as well. It's just a little bit simpler. And then what you can do is you can just let it rip. So you can just queue it up and it'll pick random prompts from throughout the model, giving you a nice scatter test of prompts that the model was actually trained on. So it's the most accurate way of testing to see the accuracy to the data set. So that's number one, right? Prompts. So prompt automation. It's going to save a lot of time, and you've got a good idea. You can be confident that you've tested that section of it. All right. So that's number one. Number two is how do we actually get our Loras into a nice way? So that's the next section. So what I do is I create a new folder beginning with an A, so that it should be somewhere up the list. And I put all of my intermediates. You can see here I've got 1 through 10 for all 129 intermediates in this particular batch. These were trained over the last couple of days. So we'll get that out of the way. And let's dive into the workflow. So this would be my Lora compare, and we're going to go through how I actually set it up. So I do obviously have this one already set up for Dark Executioner. I have this one already set up for Bakemono. I have this one already set up for Death Dance. And what I do is every time I finish setting them up, so that means you set the primitive, which sets the export folder name, and then you put the name into the things. So I select the whole thing and I go save as and export with the name at the end, right? And obviously we would have picked our Death Dance, because this is the Death Dance captions, because they would be in my prompt list folder. And pretty much everything else doesn't need to change. Nothing else needs to change at this point. I'm going to be testing with Flux Schnell with the T5. Let's see, we could make a little bit of enhancement here, but just for the sake of accuracy and comparison, I'm not going to use the full clip with the CPU offload for this demonstration. I am going to be using 12-step on text-to-image mode with Euler. So these are like default settings. Obviously, you can get different effects with different samplers, different step counts, and the CFG is 3.5. Now, this workflow, if we just have a brief overview, I've showed this before. What it's doing is it's running same seed, same prompt, same model, same everything, but with one difference, a different intermediate. So we start at Epoch 3, Epoch 4, Epoch 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's all of them. They go into labels. So we've got CR image compare for Comfy Roll. So 3 and 4 go together there. 5 and 6, 7 and 8, 9 and 10. And then we take those 4 charts and we put them together, and then we put them together again. And what that basically gives us, using the image concatenate multi from KJ Nodes, I'm using my project file path generator, and the project name is set by Death Dance, yeah. And then also what we're doing is we're taking the Lora name, see the Lora name, And the Lora name is going into the subfolder. So that means that we're going to get a whole bunch of outputs, and they'll be pre-organized by the name of the Lora, which will have the epoch, and then also fused into charts. So then fused into charts. So that gives us all the separate comparisons, and it also gives us the master compare. Okay, so then when you do one of these, it's going to do all of those images, put them all together and label them by epoch, put them together, and then you get a chart which you can literally just go, ah, it's that one. And the more you have, the more it's obvious. So the more charts you make, the more obvious it is which is the best epoch. Now, there's always two choices. One is accuracy and one is looks. So accuracy to the data set and the best looking one won't always be the same. The best looking one is often going to be more of a bias to the actual dataset model, because often what happens is you're looking for a nice blend of what you taught it versus it being exactly like what you trained. There is also a sort of S-shaped situation going on. I train mine with cosine on Prodigy. I've already given out the recipe in multiple places. You can find the information in articles. I did a full write-up in more Flux training tips and also in training Flux Lora with Civit. There's a whole bunch of articles I've written that can help you out. But what I want to do is take you through how I set this up. So I've already talked about putting the prompt lists in my prompts folder. You can use your own prompt list. It doesn't matter. They're all the same. New prompt, new line. It's a pretty standard format. So that means if you do want to use mine, it's just a case of adding my Zenkai prompt v2 into the SDXL prompt styler, which is currently set to just base. So it's not adding anything. And then that's going to go into a reroute, which feeds all of the clip text encoders. All right. I am going to be using my model sampling flux boost at 1.5. So when I say boosted, that means it's got the same max shift as base shift, and we usually use a value over 1. That would be model switch 2. If I was to use model switch 1, then it would use model sampling Auraflow. Both are legitimate. They give different looks. They both look good, so it doesn't really matter. One nice thing about this, though, is you can use my load and resize image. That's not mine. That's KJ nodes, but I actually have another node which isn't in here. But you can pick 2, and then it'll be image to image mode, and it'll use the image to image denoise value rather than the text to image denoise value. For all of these, we're using Lora strength 1, not 0.7. Okay, so the default might be 0.7, so you might want to change that. But again, sometimes I test at 0.7 just so you can see what the effects are from backing it off. So if I just go back to these earlier ones, which I made earlier, let's just put this to 1 and then save it. And then we'll go to this one and do the same thing. So we're going to change that to 1 and then we're going to save it. And there's a reason I'm using multiple tabs here as well, because one thing that people don't necessarily know is that you can queue up. I could queue 10 in this tab, 10 in this tab, 10 in this tab, and 10 in this tab. And by pre-filling everything, I don't need to worry so much about having to change it all. I can just save variants, which means I can actually go back to them later. So this is a base workflow like you would download from my GitHub collection or from the Civit project update. So for the Civit workflow pack version, this is going to be part of version 20, which is going to be a big update coming up soon. We're going to have a video out on that explaining exactly what's in it. It's going to be a big video too. Might have to split it into multiple parts because we've done a lot that you don't see necessarily. If you're not in the Discord and you don't follow my GitHub, you probably have missed some updates, but that's just the way it goes. Research doesn't stop. The train has no brakes. So here we are. And what we're going to be doing here is I'm going to automatically duplicate the tab, because I know I want a clean one for the next one I'm going to fill in. Now this one is going to be, I've already started, drone cam. So it's got Epoch 3 because it starts at Epoch 3. I only test the last 3 epochs because 1 and 2 tend to have such a strong bias to the model data that, you know, you're virtually not loading the LoRa really. You haven't really trained much. So for the recipe we use anyway, I'm using a 10 epoch 20 repeat formula with Prodigy cosine. That's the Cliff's notes for you guys. So like I said, getting back to this one, this is how I would set it up. So I want to take the pain out of this, because you might look at this and go, oh my God, be not afraid. You can do it. It's actually a very small amount of changes. Everything here pretty much doesn't need to change, because you don't want to change everything. You want to have a good comparison. And the only way to have a fair experiment is if you are changing just one thing. And the thing that we're changing is the epoch, okay? So all we do is put all the epochs in and we don't change anything else. Everything else stays the same. Otherwise, how can we compare them? There's too many variables that are changing. So by keeping this under control, we only change the epoch, and then that's the only factor that we're comparing is which, and then we can easily say the epoch that we want to publish. So let's just take you through that process, because it is actually really simple. So I already showed you how you can use the alphabetic folder just there. So that will save you some scrolling, but there's another way. So obviously when we pick this, we scroll to the one that we want, which is this one, and then we can do right click and we can do copy clip space. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to paste clip space, and you'll notice it loads the LoRa that I had. People know this works for images, but a lot of people forgot it works for a lot of things in Comfy. So then we don't have to go scrolling. We can just do copy and paste clip space. And what that means is the settings of the node, okay? It's a nice little trick. And like I say, I'm going to literally just really simple. I'm going to pick that LoRa for everyone. There you go. And now what we do is we go 10, and then the next one's going to be 9, and the next one's going to be 8, and the next one's going to be 7, and so on. 6, 5. And like I said, these little tricks are all aimed at speeding things up, so you don't have to scroll for 8 million miles just to get everything loaded in. So then we got 3 as the last one, so now we know that's 3 through 10. Next thing we're going to have to do is check that we got drone cam, because remember we're doing drone cam, and obviously name this drone cam, and I'm going to say V1 because we're probably going to do multiple runs and it's a good idea to keep them separate. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add drone cam V1 to that, shift home control C, go up here, paste, save, export as well, just to keep a version that's outside the outside of the Comfy folder. That'll go into your downloads instead. And just double check everything before you start it. So obviously we're going to be doing drone cam is the project, drone cam is the name of the file. We've got the thing loaded, and then if you haven't done this many times, just make sure you've got 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. There it is. So this one's now ready to roll. So what I'll do is I'll just get it back to a position which looks good, usually somewhere where I can easily read what it is. And then we can give it one more save, and then we'll move on to the next one. So the next one we're going to do quickly is going to be, oh wait, I'll do it from the LoRa, yeah? So go from drone cam. So we've done back in mono, we've done death dance. So let's do dueling demons. So that'll be epoch 3 first. We'll do copy clip space. And we're going to do paste, paste, paste. So there's no need to be scrolling through endless lists. Okay, Comfy's got our back. And you don't need to change anything else. The most important thing is not to change anything else. You can almost ignore the fact that there's this complicated workflow, because if you were to change one thing, whatever you changed might be the reason that the image is different. These workflows are put together so that everything is the same. I've gone to a lot of effort to make sure that the only thing that we are changing here is the epoch, because that's what we're comparing. If we were to change any value, that could be the reason why the image quality is somewhat better. 5, 4, 3. So now we're on dueling demons. So what we're going to do obviously is change this to dueling daemons, and then V1. Now I would say Windows will do spaces, but I prefer to keep a habit of not doing spaces, all right? It's a good habit to get into. You wouldn't want it to crash out on you. Now, there is one other reason why sometimes this can go wrong. Let's just copy that again, copy that, and then make sure that we've changed the prompt list to dueling demons. Where is it? There it is. Now, obviously, I already made all of these prompt lists earlier. Yes, wait a minute. There we go. So it's actually done something strange there, but that's okay. Dueling demons. There we go. It may have overwritten something. So if we just go back here and save it again. I don't want to overwrite something it already did. So save and save and save. So here we are at dueling demons. We've done that one now. So I'm ready to roll with these. Now I wouldn't do more than sort of 6 at a time because it's going to take forever. But what we're going to do is we're going to go for 16, 16. I find 16 to 20 is the magic number for being able to judge which is the one you want to publish. But more will make it easier if you're unsure. So, you know, don't be afraid to do more than that. You know, it just takes longer because you are going to be generating you're going to be generating 7 images, which are then going to get built into a chart for you for every generation. So, you know, you could be looking at hundreds, maybe thousands of images if you've got lots of tabs. All right. And we saved them purely so that we can go back to them if we decide we want to do more, or maybe we want to choose 20 steps for the whole run, that kind of thing. So it's up to you entirely what you want to do. Also, one thing that can sometimes cause a hiccup, going back to the file of folders, is see the size of the file. Now, all of the versions in a set should be exactly the same, okay? So if you see that you have one which is not the same, okay, even by 1 kilobyte, it means it didn't download completely if you trained it online, okay? So sometimes you can have an incomplete LoRa, and that will obviously cause it to crash because it will be like, I can't do that, I can't load it. It'll say incomplete file header or corrupt metadata or something like that. So you want to see the exact same file number for all the intermediates. So if you are starting a big automation run, it can be a good idea to just generate 1 image first, okay? And that way it'll throw the error and then you can go and get another copy of the file. And that's why it's really important that you don't dump the files. Always make sure that you download them and have them complete, because, you know, if you did it with a throwaway environment like a Google Colab or something and you weren't mirroring everything to a Google Drive, after you finish the training run, it's done. They're gone. One nice thing about Civit, their online trainer, is they do hang on to the files for like, I think, a week or 2. Don't quote me on the exact amount of time, but you certainly have a couple of days to go back and re-download a file if for some reason your internet crapped out. So I'm just checking mine now, and it looks like all of the ones I want to do testing on are going to be good. And like I said, it would be a real shame if you couldn't compare one of those epochs just because it didn't download fully. All right. So we're ready to start the run now. Now, remember, don't be afraid. All of this stuff is just connection lines. The reason it's so thick is purely because there are 7 identical lines. So normally you'd only see this top one here. Normally you'd only see that. That's all you normally need. and I have duplicated this line 6 more times, once for each epoch, each intermediate LoRa model. And then again, look at this. We've labeled them by the epoch. All right. So we'll start one now, and we'll see what it looks like. Of course, all you had to do was just pick the tab, queue it up, pick the tab, queue it up, and it's going to do the first 16 first. So let's just go over to the, well, we'll start off zoomed out like this. We'll do some time travel. Okay, now seems like a good time, because this thing actually goes pretty damn fast, and it'll probably take too long for me to explain what I want to explain before it starts overwriting it with new images. So the first thing that's important is the early epochs might look really good, and that is completely up to you what you pick. See, it's already going to start doing the next seed. But as you can see, as we go down here, I would say this one looks pretty good. So what's that? Epoch 6. So this would be what I'd call an early. So it's not perfect, but it has a good bias for blending with the actual base model, right? You could say this is a little bit better, but again, really what you want to do is look at the later ones. So probably that's overfit a little bit. This one looks good. You might think, well, why has he got his glove on his jacket and stuff like this? Well, I think that's just his jacket, but it's actually a problem with the original model. The original model did actually have quite a few mistakes, okay? The data set which I'm training this on. So this is why I'm saying you've got to do a couple seeds to really let this bear out. But you end up with this, which is what I'm looking at. This is what I look at, rather, because then you don't have to open up loads of images and mess around. You can just look at things like this and go, because a lot of the time Flux is an amazing model, but it has a great memory already. So I've said this before in previous videos, what you're looking for is it not learning anymore. So the difference between 10 and 9 is almost nothing. The difference between 9 and 8, you can see a difference, but really it's not really learning much after E7. If you see the difference, there's like big differences in the earlier epochs. And then as the learning rate is slowing down, obviously because it's a sine wave, so we've got a little S shape, right? So it's going to go less and then more, right? And so essentially what we've got is we've got like the tail of the S. So it's going to be very strong, or less changes, I should probably say. And if you were to look at the actual data set for this, it doesn't look like this at all. And I think that's partly because of the clip, right? So sometimes it is a good idea to go with the full clip. So that'd be the full clip. And then you could use something like this. If I say force VAE, that's the one I use, not that one. Force clip. You can do force VAE as well. You can put that one on the CPU. It's just to save overhead. But basically, this is quantized FP8. Well, it's not quantized, but it's FP8, whatever, right? It's half the size of the full T5. So you could use scaled as well. Scaled, I think, sometimes is better than that one. But this FP16 is like the full fat. That's what I call it, full fat clip. So what you want to do with the full fat clip is to hook it up and then drag that into the reroute. So I've made it super easy for you to use that if that's what you want to do. However, for the sake of a clean experiment, we're not going to make those changes just yet. We've already put 16 in the queue, and we're just waiting for it to cook them all down now. There's like 80 images that it's making. As you can see, this has got like a strong preference to the base. So this is what the base would have made with a very, very weakly trained LoRa, Epoch 1. There's Epoch 2. I don't think it's already doing the next one. So let's just take a look at the next comparison. So as you can see here, we've got our Dark Executioner with his sci-fi gun / baton weapon thing. And he does always have a helmet on. Now, sometimes I think that the one which is sort of like the weird, how would you say this? This is an outlier, okay? So you can tell that definitely there are no US flags. So it's got to be from 8, 9, or 10. Now, he's never got no helmet on in the training data. So that indicates to me it's probably E9, because E10 has practically no difference, really. Having a little bit of text isn't a problem. In fact, sometimes having a little bit of text is a good indicator because it means that that's still working. If you were to specify text, it's going to work. It's going to put the text on there. Sometimes if you overtrain, that's going to bake that out. Now, this looks a lot more like the actual dark executioner. So this is interesting. So here we have it. Again, it's got text there, which would make me think that this is the one to pick. But the face doesn't look like that. It looks more like this, okay, which is why the last one was necessarily probably a bad example, because he's got like a bit of a weird mutated face in the original training data. And you would say like, oh, this doesn't look very good, but I've actually trained this on a particularly scuffed style of artwork, so it does have this roughness to it, which is kind of messy, because I wanted to preserve that sort of old style that we used to get in early synth art, make that part of the character art style, you know? So that's one of the reasons why it looks this way. But like I said, this is looking actually really nice. So I wonder, is it working on the next one now? Yeah, it is. So now it's working on the next one. You can see he's kind of got this kind of, what do you call it, failed clone type face, you know, like the clone has been... he's got an overtrained DNA. So that's the idea, is he's kind of like this weird apocalyptic future executioner, right? So he looks a bit weird, and that is kind of the point. I don't know if you've ever heard of the game Warframe, but there's a faction in there called the Grineer, and they're humans that have been overcloned, and they all just look melted and cooked. And that's what I was going for when I was making the original data this is trained on, but with a little bit more of a Roman centurion, Judge Dredd style sort of look. And again, in that early synth art style, which is kind of cooked and a bit messy, I kind of like how this looks. It reminds me of 2 years ago when everything was exploding, but way, way better in terms of the quality because we're using Flux to emulate that. So, oh, looks like we're going to get another one. There we go. So again, looking at these, I mean, you have to look at a lot of them to really get an idea of which one you want to go for. But certainly you can tell that it's E8 or E9. E10 is overtrained because now he's got all this weird stuff going on his shoulders. It's like he's got more guns, but you can tell that they used to be parts of the door, okay? And you know, this is sort of like an evidence of overtraining. It might look like it's better because it's got more details, but I think that's overtrained. So I would probably say, again, this is the outlier. So sometimes it's actually E8 because you can see here the lines on the doors are gone and we've got some interesting features there. But again, he kind of looks a bit too human. His face looks too good, I guess. This one, he looks all melted and cooked, which is what I was going for. So it's up to you, really. I mean, if you're going for something, I just want to make it look good, you probably pick an earlier one, right? Because it's got more of the base model is being used than what was being trained in. So this would be a higher quality image at E4. So I tend to go with like between 4 and 7 if I want to go for good image. And then I tend to go with 8 or 9 if I'm going for accuracy to the training data. So it's like I said, it's really up to you. Like I said, that's a choice for the human in charge. I mean, even this one looks good, which is interesting because, you know, you would think, well, why are you training it for 10 epochs then? And because it's the S shape, right? You can't have an S shape for 10, squidge that into 3 and expect the same results. The drop and the peak will be at completely different places in terms of steps. So you've got to do the 10 to get the full shape. Anyway, there are other ways of changing the formula, but they're usually far too complicated to sort of explain. You have to get the formula and look at it and go, usually you've got to change learning rate or repeats in order to alter the formula. And so because I'm a bit of a scientist when it comes to this stuff, I only like to change one thing when I'm doing comparisons, and the one thing I'm changing in this is the intermediate, so the epoch that we're testing. That's the change. Everything else must be the same, or it's an unsafe experiment. You can't really attribute improvements to, you know, to just the epoch. Otherwise, you know, as soon as you change other variables, it gets out of control and you could be giving yourself false positives or false negatives. It works both ways. So like I said, the method works and that's the one I teach. But here it is. This is the one I would probably pick for this one. E9, I think looks great. And as I said, it's going to go through all my different Loras. So once it's done 16 on that side, it's going to do... Wait a minute. What are you doing? Hang on a minute. We haven't already done 16, surely. Okay, Comfy's being strange here because it shouldn't be doing parallel training, but it looks like for some reason we've done one on this side. But that's okay. It means I get to show that off while it's doing this. I'm guessing that the queue, for some reason, it managed to sneak one of these up in the queue. So this would be my dueling demons model. So as you can see with this image is an early epoch. So this has got nothing to do with my training data. It's more the prompt with a little bit of my training influence, okay? And then as we go down here, it's going to slowly become more like my artwork that I've been training in. So yeah, it is starting to look a bit more like what I've trained in now. Shape-shifting demons having a little duel. Because that's what this is, dueling demons. It's based on swirling ink artwork in black, red on white background. So that's why it's going to look like this. But it's mostly because I'm making a poster model to promote a project I'm working on. So as you can see, there it is. Now, if you were to see the image data which this was actually trained on, oh, it's going to do another one on this side. Look, yeah, it looks like, I think what's happened is the queue, for some reason, isn't sequential. So for whatever reason, it's snuck a few of the next workflow into the mix. I don't know why it's done that. It could just be the way that when you load, if you go tab, add to Q16, and then you go to the next tab, add to Q16, it's because of the lag of adding all the jobs, some of them get in there quicker. So if you want to make sure that it's purely sequential, it doesn't make any difference in the grand scheme of things. But if you want it to be, because obviously it's having to unload and load models, that's going to take time. You want to make sure that the queue count gets to 16 before going to the next tab and adding the next 16. Wait for it to get to 32, go to the next tab, add those. So it looks like that's what's happening. They've kind of jumbled up the order a little bit, but that's okay. So in the actual training data, it looks more like this. It's a bunch of black and red blood. So it's red, it's black ink with blood swirls on a white parchment with a fake Japanese stamp. That's what the artwork actually was that I made. Really simple to make. And then if you saw my game of telephone, which I explained using image vision, what I've done is I've gaslit the captions. So I've said that I've basically made up the caption like, oh, I see demons having a little battle, you know, having a sword fight or whatever, right? And it's not. It's just a bunch of swirls. So if you ever seen a Rorschach painting, so the idea is, do you see a butterfly or do you see a skull? The thing is, if you present Rorschach ink to the image vision and say, I can see skulls, it's going to then train skulls that look like the ink blot, okay? And so in the same way, I've taken a bunch of surreal ink and you know, black and red ink swirls, right, on white paper, and I've said, oh, it's a bunch of demons fighting, look at them, right? And so then the AI has gone, oh yeah, I totally agree. And now we've fine-tuned the clip. I call this Rorschach's clip exploit. Not a lot of people are doing this. Another thing I called it was the vision game of telephone, where you basically say, what do you think this is? And it goes, I think it's, and it's not, but it tries its best to figure out what the hell it's looking at. And then you end up with this really crazy artwork, which is exactly what I wanted it to do. So it's done what I wanted it to do at the end of the day. We've even got some kind of hero stuck in here, like. So you're going to end up with silhouettes. You're going to end up with blood and viscera and, you know, muscle tissue, maybe a few skulls, because it will see skulls. It's exactly the same as the psychological ink blot test. Yeah. What do you see? Only the difference is I'm telling the computer what I saw, and then it's doing its best to make that vision come to life. So again, you can easily see that this is very heavy on the model memory. And then as we go through, so 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, what we're going to see is it slowly get overridden, and ultimately it's E9. Because if you look at E10, the dragon's too good, or this demon face is too good. I don't like this sword appearing in the top because there won't be a caption that says the word sword, but there are images that look a little bit like swords in the data set, and that does kind of contaminate what we're trying to do. Also, this one, we've got this weird sort of little sprite thing up here, which is a bit weird. But I think it is definitely this one. You've even got the shadow of another demon in the background there. And if you zoom in on it, it's just a bunch of paint, sort of swirls and strokes. So that's exactly what I was going for. I can tell already it's going to be E9 for this model. But you get a feel for it. You get a feel for it. So it looks like it's working on the next one now. So this will probably be the last one before we end the video. So yeah, this is going to be Death Dance. Now, Death Dance is, this is really old artwork from like, I think the 1500s, 15th century artwork. So like 1480 or something, if I remember. I might have the date wrong. Maybe it's 1600s, but 15th to 17th century artwork. It's obviously public domain, guys. The artist is very dead. It was like 400 plus years ago. So what we've done is we've taken public source, public domain, open source imaging, and we've trained on this really old art style, which was, there's always a skeleton, okay? So they call it the Death Dance. So she's feeling she's got a headache right now, and the skeleton is there going, oh yeah, I'm ready, because that's the whole theme of the entire collection. It was various images of peasants and nobles and priests all going, oh, I don't feel so good. And then there's a skeleton that no one can see in the scene going, aha, I'm waiting for you. So this is almost like Death before he got his cool scythe and cloak. That's how he was often depicted. So here's another one. She's like, oh, I'm not sure if I did. Well, that tasted a bit funny because we got a food on the windowsill, probably a bad pie. The kid is looking up at mum like, you okay? And the skeleton is like, oh, don't worry, I got this. So that's what that's all about. And you can see this theme running through. She's like, oh, I don't feel so good. You okay? Don't worry, she's fine. So this is like old artwork. There will be a link in the description of this model which points back to the source of these images, because I believe these were originally trained on 2.1, and even though they trained well, they didn't train anywhere near as well as these. So again, same theme going throughout, because it's the same prompt for each epoch. So you have to sort of figure out which is the best one. At the moment, this one looks best, I think, because it's got more of the period clothing right, even though that is a very large baby. But again, it's all about bearing out the averages. So you might decide that actually you prefer an early epoch, because certainly the image quality is going to be better when you have a larger preference for the base model. And then as we get into the later epochs, you risk using an overtrained model. But I know from looking at the original data that it's probably E9. Probably E9, because I remember them wearing this sort of headgear. Okay. Yeah. And like I said, E10 is usually overtrained, although in this case, perhaps not. It depends how many images there were, and a bunch of other factors. So, you know, keep that in mind. So it looks like we're making another one over on the Death Dance side of things. Yeah. Oh, wait, no, it's not Death Dance. Dueling Demons. Did it also do another? Yeah, it also did another one of these. Don't worry too much when you see that it's got like photo, because there were no photorealistic faces. This is the result of Flux having such a bias towards photorealism. There were no realistic human faces in my data set. And this is just one of those things you have to work with when you're training Loras. A Lora is a patch on the weights. So you're actually tweaking the base model to make what you want it to make. You're not actually training in new image information. Usually UNet is not trained. So, but not always true. There are new training methods coming out, which hopefully we should be able to cover soon. Certainly, I think that on balance, out of all of these, it's probably E9. But as you can see, it's because he does have a bit of an asymmetrical helmet in the data, training data. So this is why often you might pick this one, because you might prefer to have the symmetrical helmet, okay? Not in the training data, but in the base model. This is why I said you have to choose between good image and accurate to the training data. So, because technically none of these all look too good. If you saw the original training data, it's very messy, very messy. So, but there's ways that you can bleed that out by changing the generation settings. So we have to compare apples with apples. If I was to change the CFG, the number of steps, take out some component of the generation metrics, so for example, I could remove split sigmas entirely, okay, or use a different scale. That's a completely different comparison run, so you can't really compare them fairly, all right? So that's important stuff to keep in mind. So if we go back to the dueling demons again, see, here's another thing as well. Sometimes you might think, well, actually E8 looks best here because E9, the head's on the chest, and that's certainly not what we wanted, right? You might call that, but then sometimes you're going to get outliers, right? So, I mean, E10 actually looks good because there is no head, right? But I would say probably E8 is going to be the winner for this one. So sometimes it's good to make as many different alternative generations just so that you can judge it, because you have to kind of pick the best overall, because you can only really publish one. Well, you can publish two. You can publish as many epochs as you want. But usually it makes sense for you to actually go, I'm going to make a decision and I'm going to put out E7, for example. It's totally up to you. But then again, you might decide, oh, well, actually, I like the look of E6. I mean, you might look at all 16 images and say E6 was actually best overall, whereas E9 often made some mistakes. And so, again, this is a decision that you have to make as the trainer. And when you start realizing these sorts of decisions are being made with all of the base model releases, you start to get a bit of insight into how, when it makes a little bit of a mistake, you got to think, this is just same seed. I could generate 10 seeds and pick the best image. And so you might think that this falls at the wayside, but these are the decisions you have to make anyway. So if we go back to our death dance, has it done any others? Let's see if it's done. It hasn't done any of those. It hasn't done any of those. Oh, no, it hasn't done any of those. Okay. So we're going to get another death dance scene, and that's going to be it for this one. Right. So don't forget to check out the articles. Don't forget to check out the new models. All of these are going to get published over on my Drift Johnson account on Civit. And make sure to join us on Discord. And yeah, I hope you all have a fantastic day. Thank you for